The small, desert town of Winslow, Arizona, was already dying by 1998. Half the motels along the old Route 66 strip were boarded up, and the red dust from the mesas seemed to settle in every crack, every piece of broken neon that once promised no vacancy. Locals had grown used to the silence, the kind that filled the air after the trains passed through and left nothing but the distant hum of wind. But on an August evening that year, that silence was shattered in a way no one forgot. The Callahan Motel, an abandoned property at the edge of town, became the last place anyone saw 17-year-old Melanie Rourke. The motel had been closed for nearly a decade, but for teenagers, it was a dare. A place you went when you wanted to prove you weren't afraid of ghosts or the law. Melanie was supposed to be with her friends that night, but when they pulled up to the crumbling lobby, she said she'd catch up. They drove off laughing, the sound of their car fading down the cracked highway. By sunrise, she was gone. For years, the case never moved. The motel became a ruin, a shell haunted not by spirits but by absence. The police report was thin, just a few pages, noting missing persons forms, fingerprints that led nowhere, and witness statements that contradicted each other. No forced entry, no evidence of struggle, just one personal item, a small silver ring with a turquoise inlay, found in the lobby. Dust. Her mother, Darlene, identified it without hesitation. By 2005, most of Winslow had stopped mentioning the Rourke girl. New sheriffs came and went, deputies retired, and boxes of old evidence were moved from one basement to another. Then, in 2024, a flood in the records office soaked through several cold case files. The department brought in Detective Alan Bishop to oversee restoration before the paper decayed completely. He wasn't from Winslow. He'd transferred from Flagstaff 2 years earlier. But something about the Rourke case caught him. Maybe it was the handwriting. Maybe the way the witness descriptions didn't line up. Or maybe it was the simple fact that in a town where everything faded, this story refused to die. When Bishop reopened the evidence box, it smelled of dust and time. Inside were the original Polaroids, the ring in a small plastic bag, and one item he didn't recognize from the official inventory. A motel room key with the number 7 scratched into its tag. It was corroded with age, the metal warped, but still readable. Attached to it was a faded label written in pen. Lobby mirror. He frowned. Why would a room key be labeled for a lobby mirror? He checked the photos again. In one, taken the morning after Melanie's disappearance, the mirror behind the motel's check-in desk was cracked, its center reflecting the deputy's flashlights. But there, in the corner of the image, was something Bishop hadn't noticed before. A faint outline, like a shadow of someone standing just out of frame. By late afternoon, he decided to visit the site himself. The Callahan Motel sat on the edge of the desert, its sign now leaning at a dangerous angle. The windows were boarded, graffiti covered half the walls, and the desert wind whistled through open doorways. Bishop parked his car and stepped out, squinting against the orange haze of sunset. He'd seen hundreds of scenes like this before, but something about this place felt staged, as if the air itself were waiting for him to notice what everyone else had missed. The lobby door groaned when he pushed it open. Inside, the floor was coated in sand, the furniture long since rotted. The old front desk was still there, the ledger covered in a layer of grime, and above it hung the same mirror from the photograph. It was huge, its edges flaking with age, but still mostly intact. Bishop stepped closer, running his flashlight over the surface. The mirror was mounted directly onto the wall. No frame, just bolted metal along the edges. He leaned in, wiping away years of dust, and froze. Behind the mirror, faintly visible through a crack in the plaster, was another layer of glass, a reflection behind the reflection. His pulse quickened. The edges weren't flush with the wall. They'd been sealed unevenly, as if someone had once opened it and hastily patched it back up. He checked the corners for screws or seams and noticed a single rusted hinge on the left side. The key tag, lobby mirror, suddenly made sense. He slipped the old key into the small keyhole at the mirror's base. It resisted at first, but after a few turns, there was a faint metallic click. Bishop gripped the edge and pulled. The entire mirror swung forward like a door. Behind it was a hollow compartment about 2 feet deep, lined with deteriorated drywall. Inside, he found several objects wrapped in faded linen, a Polaroid camera, a cassette tape, and what looked like a stack of paintings rolled tightly together. He set them down on the counter, dust rising in the beam of his flashlight. Then he noticed the smell. Something chemical, faintly sweet, like paint, thinner. He unrolled the first canvas carefully. It was a portrait, though unfinished, brushstrokes soft and deliberate, capturing a woman's face partially obscured by shadow. Her expression was hauntingly familiar. He looked back at the case file photo of Melanie Rourke. The resemblance was unmistakable. Bishop's breath caught. Someone had painted her. But who? And why hide it here? He took a photo with his phone, then focused on the cassette. The label read, only 8/14/98. He didn't have a tape player with him, so he bagged the items and brought them back to the station. On his drive back through the darkening desert, the radio static buzzed intermittently, a low hum filling the car. He tried to ignore it, but his mind kept replaying the reflection he'd seen, the faint silhouette behind the mirror in that old Polaroid. At the station, he borrowed an old tape player from evidence storage. The cassette clicked into place with a dry, brittle sound. He pressed play. At first, nothing but silence. Then, faintly, the sound of someone moving around. Footsteps, then the rustle of fabric. A woman's voice spoke, barely audible. "I can't see him anymore," she whispered. "He said the desert keeps secrets, but he lied." A man's voice followed, calm and almost soothing. "You shouldn't have come here, Melanie. You said you wanted to disappear." Then, the sound of a door closing. The tape cut to static. Bishop rewound it twice, his hand trembling slightly. The male voice wasn't clear enough for identification, but it was definitely recorded in that motel. The acoustics were the same. The hollow echo of that tiled lobby. The hum of an old ceiling fan. He filed the tape as evidence and called forensics to digitize it. Then, out of curiosity, he compared the voice sample to known interviews in the case file. Only one man from that original investigation had spoken on record that way: Harold Wexler, the motel's former manager. Wexler had been questioned in 1998, but never charged. He'd claimed he closed the motel a year before the incident and had nothing to do with what happened to the girl. There was no evidence otherwise, and without a body, the case had nowhere to go. Bishop searched through the database. Wexler had moved to Yuma in 2001, where he worked part-time as a handyman until his death in 2015. But But if he was dead, who hid the paintings? Who put that key in the evidence box years later? He glanced again at the note he'd found with the key. There was something faintly written on the back, barely legible. He tilted it under the light until the pencil marks caught. 4 words. Look where she painted. It wasn't an instruction. It was a message. The next morning, Bishop returned to the motel with a forensic team. They cleared debris from the old lobby and began cataloging the space behind the mirror. In the corner of the compartment, beneath layers of plaster dust, they found something wedged between the studs, a small stack of photographs. Most were Polaroids of the motel's rooms, each one capturing the same subject: an easel, a canvas, and a woman's silhouette, sometimes turned toward the camera, sometimes away. On the back of one, written in ink, "She won't sit still." The photos were eerie, but not supernatural, more like an artist's study. Still, one detail stood out. In the final photo, the reflection in the mirror beside the woman didn't match her posture. The reflection was facing the camera. Bishop stared at it for a long time, the desert wind whistling through the broken windows. Then he noticed something even stranger. The reflection wasn't hers. By evening, the department's art crime specialist confirmed the paintings were signed by a local artist named Julian Reeve. Reeve had vanished in 1999, a year after Melanie's disappearance. His last known address? Room 7 at the Callahan Motel. Bishop sat alone in his office that night, studying the portrait again under the lamp. The paint had darkened with time, but beneath the layers of blue and gray, faint brush strokes formed something like handwriting. He rotated the canvas under the light until the letters became clear. "Forgive me." He exhaled slowly. It wasn't the girl's voice on the tape pleading for help. It was his. When forensic restoration began on the rest of the canvases, one final discovery surfaced: a signature beneath the paint on the back of the first portrait. It wasn't the artist's name. It was the name of the motel's manager. The connection was undeniable. The painter, the manager, and the missing girl were all tied to that building, to that mirror, and to the secret space behind it. But something still didn't add up. Why would someone go through the effort to seal it up, label the key, and hide the evidence in plain sight for over 2 decades? Bishop stared out at the desert through the station window, the last light of dusk painting the horizon red. The wind picked up, rattling the blinds. The faint echo of that whisper from the tape seemed to follow him. He said the desert keeps secrets. He didn't sleep that night, because in his mind, he wasn't sure if she had meant the desert or the mirror. The following week brought a strange calm to Winslow. Reporters had caught wind of the discovery, but the department stayed quiet. Bishop worked mostly at night, reviewing the digitized version of the cassette, slowing down each second of static, analyzing voice inflection, ambient noise, anything that could reveal context. He listened for hours, eyes closed, headphones on, as the same chilling dialogue played again and again. But what haunted him most wasn't the words. It was the space between them. The silence on the tape wasn't silence at all. There was something in it. A faint hum, rhythmic, mechanical. When forensic audio cleaned up the background, the sound became clearer. It wasn't a fan, as Bishop had first assumed. It was an air conditioner. The kind built into motel walls, the same model still rusting inside room 7 at the Callahan Motel. The timeline snapped into focus. The tape had been recorded not in the lobby, but in that room. He returned there the next morning, the desert sky still gray with dawn. The motel stood quiet, surrounded by nothing but open land and the low hum of cicadas. The forensic team had already cordoned off the area, laying out equipment to document every inch. Bishop walked past the police tape, nodding at the technician cataloging debris. "Start with the vents," he said. The room smelled faintly of mildew and oil paint. Dust coated everything. Against one wall stood a splintered easel. On the floor, a thin layer of plaster covered fragments of broken frames. When Bishop knelt to examine them, he noticed something strange. Faint pink residue on the wooden edge of one canvas. Under the ultraviolet light, it glowed. Human tissue. Forensics confirmed within the hour. Blood, degraded by time but present enough to test. It wasn't Reeves. It wasn't Wexler's. It was female. The lab results came back 3 days later. A mitochondrial DNA match. Melanie Rourke. After 26 years, her case was no longer missing persons. It was homicide. The discovery reignited everything. Old witnesses were re-interviewed. Records long filed away were scanned and re-examined. Bishop focused on the connection between Reeve, the artist, and Wexler, the motel manager. Property records showed that after Wexler closed the motel, Reeve leased one of the rooms as a temporary studio. For 6 months, he painted there. Locals remembered him as quiet, polite, obsessed with capturing the light of the desert. Then, one day, he vanished. But Bishop couldn't ignore the voice on the tape. The male tone was deliberate, controlled, almost coaxing. Not the voice of panic or guilt, but of someone rehearsed. He requested access to Wexler's estate, looking for any correspondence or journals that could link the two men. The executor, a distant nephew, handed over 2 boxes of personal effects, old letters, receipts, photographs. Among them, Bishop found a single envelope labeled J.R. Paintings. Inside were 4 negatives and a handwritten note. He said she wanted to be remembered. The negatives, when developed, revealed a sequence of images taken inside room 7. They showed Reeve standing beside a painting, the same unfinished portrait Bishop had found behind the mirror. But in the final frame, Reeve wasn't alone. A blurred figure stood behind him, caught in motion. A woman's hair, long and blonde, partially obscured her face. Bishop magnified the print. The pendant around her neck was a silver ring with a turquoise stone. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. The same ring that had been found in the lobby dust 26 years earlier. The same ring Melanie's mother had identified. That night, Bishop couldn't shake the image. He looked again at the painting, the way the brush strokes darkened around the figure's throat, the unfinished eyes that seemed to shift under the light. Reeve had painted something more than likeness. It was confession. He arranged to visit Reeve's last known residence, a converted trailer on the outskirts of Holbrook. Most of his belongings had long been cleared out, but the current owner remembered something. He was quiet, that one, the man said, leaning on his porch rail. Used to come back from the motel covered in dust. Said he was restoring something. Then one day, he left everything and never came back. That was 99. Cops came once, but they said there was nothing to find. Inside the trailer, Bishop found remnants of a life abandoned in haste. Brushes hardened with dried pigment, unfinished sketches, and a notebook buried beneath a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. The first page read simply, "The desert keeps what it takes." As he flipped through, the entries grew more fragmented, more desperate. She asked to sit for one last portrait. He told me to lock the door. She said she could hear her own reflection breathing. The last line chilled him. The painting wasn't supposed to answer. Bishop closed the notebook and called the lab. He wanted the remaining canvases examined for hidden layers, underpaintings, or embedded materials. 2 days later, the art specialist called back. "You should see this," she said. Under infrared imaging, the team found something under the first portrait. Beneath the image of the woman's face was a second layer of paint. And beneath that, writing. A full paragraph, scrawled in hurried strokes across the canvas before it was covered over. The restored text read, "He said it would stop once she was framed. He said the reflection couldn't hurt anyone if it was buried." The words made no sense on first read, but Bishop felt his stomach turn. Buried. He ordered a ground search of the property surrounding the motel, focusing on areas behind the building where construction debris had been dumped in the late 90s. The desert excavation took 2 days. On the third morning, a technician radioed in. "Detective, we've got something." A few feet below the surface, encased in hardened soil, they uncovered a sealed wooden crate. Inside were fragments of plaster, glass, and a rusted metal frame, the original mirror from the motel lobby. The current one, the one Bishop had opened weeks earlier, was a replacement. He crouched beside the find, staring at the warped metal, its surface dulled by time. Etched faintly into the backing plate, someone had scratched words with a blade. Not her reflection. Mine. The team cataloged the evidence, and Bishop requested DNA swabs from the inside of the frame. The results stunned everyone. 2 genetic profiles, one matching Melanie Rourke, the other belonging to Julian Reeve. Bishop replayed the cassette again, listening to the man's voice. This time, he heard what he'd missed before. The tremor at the end, the pause, the faint intake of breath that didn't sound like threat or dominance, but regret. He had misunderstood. Reeve hadn't been recording an abduction. He'd been recording a confession. He returned to the motel that night alone. The sky was overcast, thunder rolling in the distance. Rain fell lightly against the cracked pavement, turning the dust to dark streaks. Inside, room 7 was stripped bare. No furniture, no easel. Just the marks on the walls where paintings once hung. Bishop stood before the spot where the mirror had been, flashlight cutting through the gloom. He remembered the note on the key tag. "Look where she painted." Turning toward the far wall, he noticed faint discoloration near the floorboards. He knelt, scraping at the surface until his fingernail caught a seam, a false panel sealed with old adhesive. He pried it loose. Behind it, wedged between the studs, was a single envelope wrapped in wax paper. Inside lay a small strip of undeveloped Polaroid film. He had it processed at the lab. When the image appeared, his breath caught in his throat. It showed the painting, the same portrait of the woman, but this time, her eyes were open, and standing behind her, half hidden by the frame, was Reeve himself, his hand pressed flat against the mirror's surface. The timestamp read 08/14/98. The same day, Melanie disappeared. The forensic report completed the timeline. Reeve had taken the photograph the night she died. Toxicology from preserved soil samples revealed chloroform residue consistent with chemical exposure. Likely accidental. A struggle in the studio, fumes from the solvents, poor ventilation. She'd passed out. He panicked, and then, in some desperate attempt to absolve himself or immortalize her, he painted her. Not just her face, but her presence. Her image layered again and again until she existed only in reflection. When the painting was finished, he sealed it behind the mirror, believing her spirit trapped within the glass. Bishop sat in his car for a long time after reading the final report. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, the horizon burning orange beneath retreating clouds. He thought about Reeve's notebook, the line about the painting answering back. He thought about how the reflection in that last photo hadn't matched the woman sitting in the chair. And then he thought about the key. Someone had placed that key in the evidence box years after Reeve's death. Someone who knew what it opened. He checked the chain of custody logs. The last recorded handler of the Rourke case files before they went missing in the flood was a retired deputy named Carl Tanner. Bishop found his address on an old personnel roster, a small ranch house outside Holbrook. When Bishop knocked on the door, Tanner answered slowly. He was in his 70s now, eyes clouded but sharp. "Didn't think I'd see that badge again," he muttered, ushering the detective inside. Bishop placed the photo on the table. "You found this room once, didn't you? Back in '98? Tanner's jaw tightened. "We were told to stop looking," he said after a pause. Wexler had friends in the department. He said it was a runaway case, not worth the manpower. But I found the mirror then. Just didn't have the key. Couldn't open it. Thought it was just storage. When I retired, I kept that key tag. Figured someday someone might finish the job." He looked up, his hands trembling. "Did you?" Bishop nodded slowly. "We did. She's been found." For a long moment, Tanner said nothing. Then, in a voice barely audible, "The desert keeps its promises, detective, but it doesn't keep them forever." When Bishop drove back through Winslow that night, the town looked almost different. The neon of the old diner flickered to life. The rain had cleared, and for the first time in decades, there was a quiet sense of closure. The Callahan Motel would be demolished the following week, its remains cleared for a solar field. But Bishop stopped one last time. He walked through the lobby one final time, flashlight trailing along the dust-covered floor. The mirror hung open, its hollow compartment exposed. The air felt still, the kind of stillness that follows a confession, not a haunting. He stood there for a while, staring at the place where two lives had collided and left their mark in glass. Then, as he turned to leave, something caught the light, a small reflection dancing against the far wall. It was nothing, he told himself, just the beam of the flashlight. But as he stepped outside into the night, the wind shifted, and from behind him, a faint metallic sound echoed, the quiet click of a hinge swinging shut. He didn't turn around. Some reflections, he thought, were meant to stay buried,